under my reign too. My palace you came, I bow down to your highness, cause you know I'm the king.
The twists and turns of the Aaron Rodgers saga continue. As we welcome you into NFL Live, I am Field Yates. For the next hour, I will have, amongst others, Tim Hasselbeck, Damian Woody, and Kimberly Martin. We'll get into a lot, including a developing story, and a significant one at that, involving the Washington football team. Of course, more to come on Aaron Rodgers in just a bit. But within the last 30 minutes, we have received news, that courtesy of who else than Adam Schefter, who tweeted just minutes ago about the Washington football team. And Schefter, I'll give you the floor. What more can you tell us here?
Phil, can you hear me?
We got you now, Schefter. Go ahead.
Okay, because basically, I'm sorry about that confusion. Essentially, moments ago, the NFL just handed down a $10 million fine to the Washington football team for essentially the culture that the organization had for years. This was an investigation that a law firm in Washington ran through the NFL. The league has handed down the penalties and come to the conclusion that this is worthy of a $10 million fine, one of the largest fines the league has handed down. We should also point out here, Field, that essentially there were no suspensions. Nobody here was responsible for a loss of a draft pick. So really, the one penalty, and it's a severe hit, is a $10 million fine. Dan Snyder did not get disciplined. And when we look back across time at NFL owners, there have been very few that essentially have gotten disciplined. We saw Jim Irsay, who was charged. We saw Jerry Richardson suffer in Carolina. But very few owners have been disciplined over time. And in this particular case, the NFL sought to impose the fine on the Washington football team. No suspensions, no loss of draft picks, but this was for the culture that they ran. And you'll notice this past week, of course, the Washington football team promoted Tanya Snyder to co-CEO. Not an accident that comes down this week, in a week where the league hands down a $10 million fine against the Washington football team.
Schefter, stand by, because we'll come back to you in just a moment for more news. But you mentioned Daniel Snyder addressing this matter. Here is what he had to say in a statement that just was released. I have learned a lot in the past few months about how my club operated and the kind of workplace that we had. It is now clear that the culture was not what it should be, but I did not realize the extent of the problems or my role in allowing that culture to develop and continue. I know that as the owner, I am ultimately responsible for the workplace. I have said that, and I say it again. He continues, I feel great remorse for the people who had difficult, even traumatic experiences while working here. I'm truly sorry for that. I can't turn back the clock, but I promise that nobody who works here will ever have that kind of experience again, at least not as long as Tanya and I are the owners of this team. More on this, and that comes from Kimberly Martin, who joins us now. And Kimberly, you previously covered this team for the Washington Post. What's your reaction to this $10 million fine handed down by the league?
Fields, I think that sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But I think there's always going to be skepticism when it comes to NFL owners paying this sort of money. That might be pocket change to a lot of owners, as crazy as that sounds. There's also always going to be skepticism when it comes to Daniel Snyder. You mentioned I covered the team before. You know, the stories that we saw last offseason that were written by the Washington Post were not the first. There's always been this cloud around that organization for a long time, and the organization went above and beyond to try to rectify that. They made a lot of new hires, a lot of diverse hires in light of those Washington Post stories, but you know, no owners, from what I gather, no owners were pushing to force Dan Snyder to sell. You know, I think like I said, there's always going to be skepticism with him because these are not new allegations. There's always been this cloud of suspicion and always questions about how things were run internally. So having his wife now take over the day-to-day operations, again, is that a PR move? The feeling is that a PR move, or is this an organization that's really committed to turning the corner? And some people wonder, can it do that with Dan Snyder still as the owner?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, Kimberly, because it feels like, at least from this view in Bristol, that since Ron Rivera was hired as the head coach, the organization has made some progress culturally and seems to be more diverse and more open, and certainly a place that players seem to have a little bit more pride playing for. Do you get the sense that we're heading in the right direction? Understanding this is a big step back in terms of money, but it feels like things are trending in a positive direction.
Yeah, from not just Ron Rivera, Jason Wright, the new president, well, relatively new president. It feels like it felt like a new day last year in a sense. But again, Daniel Snyder being at the top of that org chart, that's where the issue is, and that's where the skepticism lies. Because while they try to steer course, they're separating from Daniel Snyder, except he's still there. Like, that almost feels like the elephant in the room. And I think people down in that region now still have been wanting him to get rid of the team, but that's clearly not going to happen. And as long as he is there, the questions of how could he not know? How could he not have known he was enabling behavior? Because these are not new stories and not new rumors.
Well, keep in mind here, Kimberly, that there were nearly 150 former and current employees of the Washington football team that were interviewed in the investigation conducted by Beth Wilkinson, the Washington attorney that the league hired to do this particular investigation. And there were all sorts of findings. And we look at a team now that is and has been in complete transition. You mentioned all the hires that this team made. We go back to last year and the team dropping its nickname in favor of the Washington football team as it goes on a journey to find a new name for the football team. Dan Snyder stepping away from the day-to-day operations of the team, ceding control to his wife Tanya, who will be more involved. She obviously comes with some rave reviews. She was the one that thought up the breast cancer campaign to raise funds for Think Pink. So she comes with a decorated background, and she will be very much in control of this franchise as Dan Snyder steps aside from all that has transpired with an organization that has been in turmoil but is trying to come out on the other side of it right now.
Seems like we're making some progress down there in D.C., at least a little bit, Schefty, but a big hit to the wallet of Dan Snyder today. But he's not the only person who will owe the NFL some money. A day of discipline's upon us. What more can you tell us about teams that have been fined today?
Field, it has not yet happened, but it's going to happen in a short time. The NFL is going to fine 3 different teams and head coaches for OTA violations. The Jacksonville Jaguars, the San Francisco 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys. My understanding is there had been some inadvertent contact. The NFLPA saw that contact on video, had video evidence, lodged complaints against these particular teams, and there you see the 3 fines in their specifics that were coming down today. The 49ers fined $100,000, Kyle Shanahan $50,000, Jaguars $200,000, Urban Meyer $100,000, the Cowboys $100,000, with Mike McCarthy being fined $50,000. So 3 separate fines that come down. So we've got a $10 million fine for the Washington football team for issues and allegations that are obviously much more serious than some inadvertent contact during OTAs. But on that same day, these 3 particular teams also, along with their head coaches, get hit up for some fines. So look, Field, this usually happens right before the July 4th holiday, right before the lull. The league manages to get in all this news, and it's happening again as we speak.
Nothing like the Friday news dump, though we're just a day in advance of it and ahead of the holiday weekend. Schefty, as always, thanks for making time for us on the fly here today, and great insight and reporting.
Thank you, Field.
All right, more to come here on NFL Live. As NFL Live is brought to you by Summer of Soul. Coming up here in a second, as you hear Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers. We'll talk about them in just a minute. But I was telling you, NFL Live is brought to you by Summer of Soul in theaters and streaming on Hulu Friday. Actions are rarely taken in a vacuum. Pressure is applied and decisions are made. And sometimes that pressure can come from a date on the calendar. The next pressure point for Aaron Rodgers and the Packers comes tomorrow when players have to decide if they will opt out of the 2021 NFL season. Let's get our NFL insider Jeremy Fowler in here. Jeremy, you've been all over this Rodgers situation this summer. What have you heard about the possibility of Rodgers opting out of the 2021 season before tomorrow's deadline?
Well, most people I speak to around the league do not expect Aaron Rodgers to opt out, but he's still got a few hours to do so. Now, as a voluntary opt-out, Rodgers would receive no salary this year, and his salary of nearly $15 million would kick to 2022. But there is a bit of a loophole here because Rodgers received a roster bonus of nearly $7 million back in March. And I'm told that since that's technically already earned, he could probably sit on that and then just do nothing this year, making nearly $7 million. But I talked to a league source who said, look, Rodgers is one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. So locking into not playing in 2021 this early could be difficult for him, and it limits some of his trade options. The flip side, though, it's the ultimate trump card against the Packers because it limits all of their options as well. So if this deadline passes, the next artificial deadline for Rodgers and the Packers, July 27th, start of training camp.
The entire NFL is keeping its eyes on him. So Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr, they share a few things in common, one of which is his experience of playing with star wideout Davante Adams. Carr recently stated how it would be a dream come true to reunite with his former Fresno State teammate, which Adams subsequently had the chance to respond to. Take a listen to what he has to say.
Obviously, I love Derek to death. We got a great friendship, and we still communicate really, really consistently. He's one of my best friends. So obviously, it'd be a dream to be able to play with him. But I'm a Packer now, so until that point where we make that decision, I guess we just we'll see what happens.
Damian, after you hear those comments from Davante Adams, would you have any concerns?
Yeah, Phil, I would have some concerns. Listen, if you're a fan of the Green Bay Packers, listen, the last thing you want to hear is your star wide receiver, talking those niceties about his former quarterback, collegiate quarterback, and it's just more noise considering the fact that we're about 3 weeks away from teams starting to report to training camp. You got the Aaron Rodgers dilemma going on between him and the organization, and now your star wide receiver is possibly talking about leaving the organization. That's not what you want heading into a new season as far as training camp is concerned. So there's still time to smooth all these things out, but man, that's a lot of noise for an organization that was just in the NFC Championship game last year.
Right.
Yeah, Damian, I think you're right. It's not good if you're a fan to hear Davante Adams saying that. With that being said, it's no different than if someone asked me about my former college teammate, Damian Woody. I'd say nice things, even if I didn't really mean them. I would still say nice things about him. Okay? I think that's what's going on here. Because let's be honest, he wants to be at Green Bay. He's handled this situation about as good as you could possibly handle it. So he's been underpaid. He probably deserves to kind of set the new high water mark in terms of wide receivers in the league, and I think that he probably will. And I do think in some ways his situation is probably a little bit tied to Aaron, in that, look, staying in Green Bay seems a lot more attractive if you know that number 12 is going to be the quarterback. So I think Adams just is playing the game, saying the things that he feels like he could say, even if all of them, if all of the statements aren't true.
Kimberly, what are you hearing about the Packers' plans for Davante Adams? Because he's only 1 year away from being a free agent, potentially.
Yeah, Field, here's what we know. He's entering the final year of his deal. The Packers want him, and they want to extend him. You can't argue against Davante Adams being a top 5 receiver. In fact, you could even argue that he's number 1 in the league. The Packers know this, and they want to get a deal done, especially with the Aaron Rodgers drama hanging overhead for all these months. Extending Adams is a priority. So as we get closer to training camp, hopefully we'll hear some more noise about that.
Well, the connection between Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams has been incredible. Over the past 5 seasons, they have 59 touchdowns. That right there is, of course, one of the best in the NFL. But for now, we'll see whether Aaron Rodgers is actually back in Green Bay for the 2021 season. We've got so much coming up here on NFL Live. As we know, the story up and fined $10 million after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment over a 15-year period. Over 150 people were interviewed, and as a result, Commissioner Roger Goodell concluded that the team's workplace culture was, quote, highly unprofessional. He said bullying and intimidation took place and, quote, numerous female employees reported having experienced sexual harassment and a general lack of respect in the workplace, unquote. Washington owner Daniel Snyder issued a statement saying he agrees with the commissioner's decision and has ceded day-to-day operations of the team to his wife, Tanya Snyder, who was named co-CEO Tuesday. As mentioned, it was Adam Schefter who first broke this news just a little bit before the start of NFL Live today, and Adam is back with us. What more can you add to this situation, Adam, beyond what we found out already, which is $10 million has been fined by the NFL for Daniel Snyder.
One of the stiffest fines in NFL history, Field, and this is as a result of an investigation that the Washington-based attorney Beth Wilkinson ran for the National Football League, in which she and her firm interviewed over 150 former and current employees with the Washington football team. And as you mentioned, they found an atmosphere of sexual harassment, of bullying, of an unwelcome place, which Tanya Snyder, the new CEO of the Washington football team, commented essentially this afternoon that she didn't know that it existed, and she's mortified that it happened in their building. Now, Tanya Snyder will take a more prominent role with the organization. That announcement came earlier this week, obviously, with the anticipation of what was going to come from the NFL and its findings, in which they concluded this pervasive atmosphere that was unacceptable across the board, in the words of Beth Wilkinson and Roger Goodell. Now, Daniel Snyder will not be forced to sell the team. He will continue to remain as the owner of the team. And remember, back in the spring, he bought out his limited partners to get 100% control. And he even accused those limited partners of essentially extorting him and trying to get control of the franchise. So this obviously is a situation that's unfolding, and really it's been going on in Washington for quite some time, where that organization was considered to be stuck in a cesspool. And they have tried over the last year plus to correct many of the things that that organization was clearly doing wrong for many years going back. And we saw last year the team get rid of its nickname and go to the Washington football team as it continued its search for a new name. We saw, obviously, all sorts of issues with hires where the team went in a more diverse direction with better voices, with a more well-rounded voice pool here. And so now the finding comes out today where there was no suspensions for Daniel Snyder or anyone in the organization. There was not a loss of draft picks. There were no charges, but there was a $10 million fine handed down to Washington. That fine obviously will be donated to charity, but it's a new day in Washington. And I think this ultimately is something that will help the franchise turn the page on its sordid past.
Well, Adam, a ton to unpack there, and of course, great insight from you and reporting throughout the day. Lots of perspective there as we turn to the rest of the cast here for some more insight. And I'll begin with you, Damian. Your thoughts, your initial reaction to the report from Adam. $10 million fine for Daniel Snyder. Is that enough? Is that going to cause change within this organization?
Phil, that's a drop in the bucket, okay? And let's just be honest here. You're talking about an organization that's probably worth upwards of $3 billion plus. And $10 million, you can find that under your sofa cushion. I just think that when you talk about the Washington football team and all the stories that we've heard over the years of intimidation and sexual harassment over the years, the fact that the NFL levied a $10 million fine, while that might seem like a lot of money to a lot of folks, I mean, we're talking about an NFL franchise. Okay, so I look at it as what's the real priority? What's the real message that we're sending as it relates to women in the workplace and how we're going to have an acceptable workplace environment for an organization that has failed at that for several years? And I just think the NFL fell short in this particular situation because, again, we're talking about a multi-billion dollar organization, and $10 million, that's nothing. It's nothing. It's laughable to me. I understand that the $10 million is going to charity, but $10 million, come on.
Yeah, Damien, you're right. I mean, you're right in terms of the amount of money and what that means to Daniel Snyder or the organization. I thought Adam used a pretty significant word talking about, Tanya Snyder's remarks in terms of what they learned through the investigation. It was that she was mortified. I bet you the Snyders are embarrassed. And so in terms of, going back and changing what's happened over the last 15 years in Washington, there's really not much that can be done. But what can be done is having a different environment going forward. And I think Adam outlined kind of some of the things that have gone on over the past couple of months in Washington in terms of new hires, in terms of the new leadership with Tanya Snyder being in charge. And I think that ultimately the money isn't what's going to change the culture in Washington. It's the people that are in place, that are in charge, that are overseeing the operations in all areas of the club, which I'm sure the league has an expectation of being very different than they've been in the past. And so, the money is not going to change it. I think the humiliation and embarrassment of the type of operation that had been run is probably the key factor for change.
The interesting thing that I took away was 15 years. This isn't something that, we've only been talking about 2 years, 3 years. This is pervasive, long-standing. When you thought of Washington, words like dysfunction. Adam used the word cesspool. That's the reality. Yes, it is a new day in Washington, and the league and Beth Wilkinson, everybody feels good about Ron Rivera and Jason Wright at the helm trying to steer this franchise in the right direction, as they should. But when you talk about 15 years, how long, and Dan Snyder stepping away, it's voluntary. It's not, it's voluntary. No suspension, outside of the $10 million fine. This is a man whose net worth, we're talking billions. So that's why it may sound funny to some people that Damian called it a drop in the bucket, but you talk about billions versus millions. Like, this is a different stratosphere when it comes to money. So hopefully Washington has Dan Snyder has opened his eyes. His wife clearly mortified by the situation, but this is not a new thing. That's why I said it's been a long time coming that there be some sort of punishment and penalty for this franchise.
As mentioned, of course, new roles now in Washington, and more from ESPN Washington reporter John Keim, who says, quote, wrapped up a call with the league about the Washington football team fine. Tanya Snyder will rep the team at league meetings. Dan Snyder will focus on stadium issues. This was called a voluntary move. The league said there's no written report. Beth Wilkinson communicating findings and recommendations to them verbally. They wanted to keep it confidential, which is why they chose this route. Also, Wilkinson's job was never to submit punishment recommendations, more recommendations about how to improve the workplace culture, etc. All right, so again, a changing of the guard in terms of power structure within the Washington football team organization. Shefty, what should we make about the fact that Tanya Snyder is now in charge of this team day to day?
Well, Dan Snyder's not exactly going away field, but Tanya Snyder obviously will have a more prominent role with the organization. Dan Snyder will not be involved in the day-to-day operations of the team, but it's not like he's banned from attending games. He can still be there. He can still be a part of the team, and he is, again, the owner of this football team. So how do you tell the owner, who was not disciplined in this particular case, no, you can't go to practice, you can't go to games, you can't. So he'll still be around, but Tanya Snyder obviously is going to have a more prominent role as the co-CEO of the Washington football team, and she will be heavily involved in the decisions of this franchise. And this is a franchise that's clearly trying to turn the page on its sordid past and move forward to get out of the cesspool that it swam in for years and years, where a culture of harassment and bullying existed within that organization. And Tanya Snyder, we mentioned before, said she was mortified. That was her word, mortified, to learn of what was happening in the building of the franchise that her and her husband own. So they are reaching out and they are bringing in a woman's point of view, which is welcome, which is needed, which is necessary in this particular case, and she will work with all the other new people that the Washington football team has tried to bring aboard in the past year, where it's tried to remake, rightfully, this franchise that has been in the gutter, that has been in the cesspool, that has been everywhere bad you could say you want to say it's been, and try to correct many of the misdeeds of a franchise that had run amok over the last 2 decades.
A lot of work ahead for this franchise, but certainly seems like there are some steps that have been taken today. And again, the headline from Adam about an hour ago, the team has been fined $10 million as a result of this investigation. That was over 15 years worth of findings. We'll have plenty more on this throughout the show. Of course, the story of the day, the Washington football team punishment. But coming up also, will Justin Fields be the starter?
There is a bridge.
There is just no chance that Andy Dalton is this team's starter.
They better start Justin Fields week 1 to give themselves the best chance to win football games.
So Bears top wide receiver Allen Robinson was recently asked about whether or not Justin Fields will have the opportunity to be the starter. His response, I have no idea. Sounds sort of like me. We bring back our crew, and Kimberly Martin, I'll start with you. What have you heard about how Justin Fields looked in camp for the Bears?
So during minicamp, I checked in Chicago to get a sense of how Fields is looking, and I was told there's a lot of excitement about him, and I was told the kid is throwing dimes. And it got me thinking, besides the athleticism, the strong arm, and all that, I thought about what else does Fields have, and he has the allure of the unknown. We know what Andy Dalton is. Everybody knows what Andy Dalton is. We've had 10 years to see what Andy Dalton is and his ceiling. Now, keep in mind, the Bears' schedule is very difficult, like brutal. So if they're scuffling with Andy Dalton, you can't tell me that fans and even some players aren't going to be looking around and a little anxious to see Justin Fields and if he can let it rip in a game.
Damian, first it was the Bears' official Twitter account, and then it was their head coach, Matt Nagy, who said that Andy Dalton is QB1. He's the starter. What was your reaction to that?
Why come out this early and just anoint the guy QB1? Like, literally, you traded up 10 spots to go get the quarterback. We all know the coach and the general manager is on the hot seat. Jobs are on the line. So my thing is, why not make it an open competition? We know where Andy Dalton is. I'm not calling him a scrub or anything like that. We know who he is, okay? So why not make it an open competition and let the best man win? I get the schedule. I get all of that. But to just come out and be like, oh, QB1, please stop.
And the look on Damian's face is exactly why we are going to see Justin Fields. And Kimberly's point about the schedule is why we are going to see Justin Fields before week 9. That is the reality of it. Look at their schedule. It is brutal. And in fact, week 8, if I'm right, week 8, 49ers, week 7, the defending champion Buccaneers. So, look, we're going to see him once we get around that halfway point of the season. And, Damian's reaction is going to be the reaction in the locker room. Not because, to his point, that Andy Dalton, there are some things that he can do. But the fact is, this guy has so much talent. I feel like he was the most kind of overlooked player in the draft. Coming out of a big program, he did so many things extremely well. You think about the influence that he can have on a team that's struggling. Look at this for the run game. It's just a typical zone read, okay? Defensive end's going to crash down. This is a quarterback that's over 230 pounds. That's not down in two-hand touch against a very good defense. Now, how about him, playing the position of quarterback? Understanding the little things. The protection gets blitzed. It's a full slide by the offensive line. He's throwing a shallow cross. Give ground, find a throwing angle, the ball a foot out in front to allow for run after the catch. This is teaching tape right here. This is exactly what you want. I think he's more ready than people realize. Then you get down to the red zone when things need to happen quickly. How about his ability to anticipate on a corner stop? Ball out early, perfectly placed, beats the pressure. He does so many things well that I just think that if they are not above 500 at the halfway point, the whole locker room is going to be looking at Matt Nagy the way Damian was just looking at you, Field.
Hey, Tim, that was a hell of a tape, my man. That was a hell of a tape. You just proved my point right there. You just proved my point with that tape. We know where Andy Dalton is. Man, make it an open competition. Let's see who wins this job.
I get the suspicion that there will indeed be an open competition. It won't be long before Justin Fields is very much in the mix. We got another developing story here today. We've already told you about how the Washington football team was fined $10 million. When we bring back Adam Schefter for more discipline taking place today in the NFL. And Adam, these are related to OTA violations.
Yeah, Field, the NFL fined 3 teams for OTA violations. My understanding is there was contact that was inadvertent in the team's eyes, but captured on video, nonetheless to the point where the NFL went ahead and fined the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, as well as their head coaches. And there were not just fines involved, but the NFL Management Council turns out it ordered the 49ers to cancel the last week of their offseason program last month. So the 49ers shut it down early. Everybody saw that. What they didn't know was that the management council ordered that to happen. The Cowboys were ordered to forfeit one OTA practice during the first week of the 2022 offseason, and the Jaguars were ordered to forfeit 2 weeks or 2 days of their offseason program next spring. We mentioned the fines: $100,000 for the 49ers, $50,000 for Kyle Shanahan, $200,000 for the Jaguars, $100,000 for Urban Meyer, and $100,000 for the Cowboys, and $50,000 for Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys head coach. So a whole host of fines to organizations, head coaches, and the most notable one today, of course, for the most significant actions, the Washington football team fined $10 million in addition to the OTA violation fines that the league also has handed out this afternoon, Field.
And just moments ago, the league wrapped up a conference call, which you will hear highlights from next here on NFL Live. And Adam Schefter is not going anywhere. He has been all over this story. Again, Washington.
So, look, we're going to see him once we get around that halfway point of the season. And, Damian's reaction is going to be the reaction in the locker room. Not because, to his point, that Andy Dalton, there are some things that he can do. But the fact is, this guy has so much talent. I feel like he was the most kind of overlooked player in the draft. Coming out of a big program, he did so many things extremely well. You think about the influence that he can have on a team that's struggling. Look at this for the run game. It's just a typical zone read, okay? Defensive end's going to crash down. This is a quarterback that's over 230 pounds. That's not down in two-hand touch against a very good defense. Now, how about him, playing the position of quarterback, understanding the little things? The protection gets blitzed. It's a full slide by the offensive line. He's throwing a shallow cross. Give ground, find a throwing angle, the ball a foot out in front to allow for run after the catch. This is teaching tape right here. This is exactly what you want. I think he's more ready than people realize. Then you get down to the red zone when things need to happen quickly. How about his ability to anticipate on a corner stop? Ball out early, perfectly placed, beats the pressure. He does so many things well that I just think that if they are not above 500 at the halfway point, the whole locker room is going to be looking at Matt Nagy the way Damian was just looking at you, Field.
Hey, Tim, that was a hell of a tape, my man. That was a hell of a tape. You just proved my point right there. You just proved my point with that tape. We know where Andy Dalton is. Man, make it an open competition. Let's see who wins this job.
I get the suspicion that there will indeed be an open competition. It won't be long before Justin Fields is very much in the mix. We got another developing story here today. We've already told you about how the Washington football team was fined $10 million. When we bring back Adam Schefter for more discipline taking place today in the NFL. And Adam, these are related to OTA violations.
Yeah, Field, the NFL fined 3 teams for OTA violations. My understanding is there was contact that was inadvertent in the team's eyes, but captured on video, nonetheless to the point where the NFL went ahead and fined the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, as well as their head coaches. And there were not just fines involved, but the NFL Management Council, turns out it ordered the 49ers to cancel the last week of their offseason program last month. So the 49ers shut it down early. Everybody saw that. What they didn't know was that the Management Council ordered that to happen. The Cowboys were ordered to forfeit one OTA practice during the first week of the 2022 offseason, and the Jaguars were ordered to forfeit 2 weeks or 2 days of their offseason program next spring. We mentioned the fines: $100,000 for the 49ers, $50,000 for Kyle Shanahan, $200,000 for the Jaguars, $100,000 for Urban Meyer, and $100,000 for the Cowboys, and $50,000 for Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys head coach. So a whole host of fines to organizations, head coaches, and the most notable one today, of course, for the most significant actions, the Washington football team fined $10 million in addition to the OTA violation fines that the league also has handed out this afternoon, Field.
And just moments ago, the league wrapped up a conference call, which you will hear highlights from next here on NFL Live. And Adam Schefter is not going